The amount of material in today's Torah portion is extensive. So we're only going to take on a couple of incidents to highlight and expound upon them. Now, recalling last week's portion, this week is an extension of that, as it involves family conflict. And what we have here is the continuing story of the twin brothers, Esau and Jacob, who didn't start on the right foot from the very beginning of their relationship. We read of the early start of this perpetual hostility between them in Genesis chapter 25. The children fought with each other inside her so much that she said, if it's going to be like this, why go on living? So she went to inquire of Yehovah, who answered her, there are two nations in your womb, and from birth they will be two rival peoples. One of these peoples will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Now, one of the first things we can learn from this story is that Jacob more resembles the character of his father, while Esau is more like Rebekah's side of the family. And we could blame the bitter hate and murderous intentions of Esau on the pivotal event that Jacob had sold him a bowl of soup in exchange for his inheritance. This business deal between Esau and Jacob would not and should not have happened if Esau hadn't despised his inheritance as the firstborn. You know, Jacob actually took a gamble in this bad business of using deception to obtain the rights of inheritance that traditionally didn't belong to him. Jacob is giving something physical, a real bowl of soup, and receiving but a promise of an intangible inheritance that no one knows when or how or if it will actually happen. In the end, this was never actually about the transfer of physical and material wealth, or nothing we read ever says Jacob finally received that wealth. But rather, it's about the transference of God's covenant promises. In Genesis 32, Jacob is returning home to the land of Canaan, the land that was promised by God to Abraham, his grandfather, and also the promise that was repeated to Isaac, Jacob's father. But Jacob's not returning to the land of Canaan in the same way that he left the promised land. When he left the land, he was alone. He was full of fears of the unknown with only his staff. He was running away from his brother's intent to kill him upon the death of their father. Now, more than 20 years later, Jacob is returning with his two wives, 12 sons, some daughters, and considerable wealth. Still, after 20 years, he remained in great fear of his brother Esau. Now, in the midst of the fears and anxieties that burdened his soul, Jacob knew some things that are important for us to learn as valuable lessons in our familial relationships, as well as our human relationships in general. And sadly, human nature in these relationships says many will eventually turn into conflict. Let's look at this more closely. First of all, the shrewd business deal that he did with Esau, his brother, was not considered fair and just by his brother. No doubt the deal was culturally legal. But any fair judge in the land would have considered it taking advantage of a person at a moment of weakness when he wasn't thinking straight. The principle that we all need to remember and put into practice is that there are things between people that might be legal and enforceable by law, but they're still not fair or ethical. Second, Even though the deal with Esau was legal, Esau didn't think it was fair for the following reasons. Esau was experiencing a miserable moment in his life, and he was hungry. Hunger can make people do some stupid things. I take a piece of bread without permission. Books have been written about such things. This is no way to treat a brother. Whether a blood relation or a brother in our faith, this is not right. The seed of discord and the feeling that you have been cheated by your own brother will not be forgotten or ever fully leave you, even if you have moments of reconciliation. Moments like funerals of loved ones, maybe weddings of your brother's children or such occasions, you will always have little to no trust or peace with your brother who took advantage of your weaknesses. What's more is that in this case of Esau and Jacob, their own mother helped your brother by cheating your old and blind father to give your blessing to your cheating brother Jacob. So realizing this, seeking reconciliation is always the wise thing to do. Yet wisdom also says to be cautious because of these realities of human behavior that I just listed. Here's what happened when Jacob crossed the Jordan River on his way back to Canaan with his family in tow. First of all, he prepared for the worst. He took precaution, considering every possible scenario so that at least some of his family could survive. Jacob prayed to God. He reminded himself in the prayer of God's wonderful promises and prophecies. Well, this was a great encouragement to Jacob. It gave him strength. This is why we always ought to remember God's promises to us as his children. They are a source of strength, courage, hope, on which we can rely and trust. After that, he divided his family into two halves, two camps, to minimize his risk. In case one half of the camp is attacked, then the second camp would have a chance to survive. Now, let me be clear. It's not out of mistrust in God and in God's promises that Jacob did this, but rather out of wisdom and common sense. Jacob sends messengers of peace, along with gifts to his brother Esau, offering the hand of peace and reconciliation. This act was really a confession and acknowledgement that there was some underhanded behavior that took place in their previous relationship. Jacob sends rich, expensive gifts to show how much he respects and appreciates him. This, in the Middle East, was then and remains a very important part of peaceful business and family relationships. Jacob spoke words that his brother ought to speak when there are problems. His brothers, rather, ought to speak when there are problems between them. Listen to Genesis 33, 4 through 11. Esau ran to meet him, hugged him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him, and they wept. And Esau looked up, and on seeing the women and children, he asked, "Who are these with you?" Yaakov answered, "The children of God is graciously given to your servant." Then the slave girls approached with their children. They prostrated themselves. Leah, too, her children approached, prostrated themselves. At last came Yosef and Rachel, and they prostrated themselves. Esau asked, "What's the meaning of this procession of droves I encountered?" He answered, "It was to win my Lord's favor." Esau replied, "I have plenty already, my brother. Keep your possessions for yourself." Yaakov says, "No, please. If now I have won your favor, accept my gift. Just seeing your face has been like seeing the face of God now that you have received me. So please accept the gift I brought you, for God has dealt kindly with me. I have enough." Thus he urged him until he accepted it. Look, family is family. And reconciliation and peace between family members is of great importance. It doesn't have to be made impossible. We can learn from these passages that when the conflict is bitter and long, even making a momentary peace, like between Esau and Jacob, there's no guarantee it will continue. The enmity can resurface over and again, even becoming more bitter than before by repeating some of the mistakes of the past on both sides. The next event in this Torah portion I want to highlight is when Jacob and his family crossed over the river Yabok, which is actually but a small tributary into the Jordan River. Jacob is coming from the northeast, and before crossing the Jordan River with his camp, he decided to cross the Yabok, and Jacob decided to take his closest family during the night, help them cross over this creek. First, he helps Leah and her children cross, next Rachel and her sons, and suddenly out of nowhere, when Jacob's alone, a man appears in the middle of that waterway. Genesis 32:24, he took them and sent them across the stream, then sent his possessions across. Yaakov was left alone. Then some man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when he saw that he didn't defeat Yaakov, he struck Yaakov's hip socket so that his hip was dislocated while wrestling with him. And the man said, "Let me go, because it's daybreak." Yaakov replied, "I won't let you go until you bless me." The man asked, "What's your name?" He answered, "Yaakov." Then the man said, "From now on you will no longer be called Yaakov, but Israel, because you have shown your strength to both God and men and have prevailed." And Yaakov asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why are you asking about my name?" and blessed him there. Yaakov called the place Peniel, because I have seen the face of God. I have seen God face to face, yet my life is spared. And as the sun rose up upon him, he went on past Peniel, limping at the hip. Okay. Look, this very strange event. And the description of the struggle between that man and Jacob until dawn is the source for many stories and speculations. And much of the Jewish Kabbalah is actually occupied with this event. Now, the most important thing about it, however, is to stress that again in the book of Genesis, we have a name change initiated by a divine presence. What was the purpose of this struggle, the change of name from Jacob to Israel? Jacob was described earlier as a meek man who liked sitting in his tent and contemplating. He's now a man who is a kind of physical struggle with God. He's not defeated. A man whose seed will carry the Abrahamic promises all the way until the end of this earth, and then finally ushering in the new heaven and new earth, a recreation of the world without sin, without illness, but with eternal peace and life. In this weird encounter at the Jabbok, the Hebrew used for this man is Ish, which can mean man, can mean husband, even mighty or a great man, as we used back in those ancient times. But the thing to get here is that this man seemed to Jacob to be flesh and blood, more or less a regular male human being, and yet he had to be thinking to himself, what strange kind of person is this? We're told that this wrestling match went on all night long, but why they wrestled at all is left up to us to wonder. What could possibly have been the catalyst to even start this battle? When this man concluded Jacob was not going to give up the fight, he dislocated Jacob's hip with but a touch. No, even though verse 25, chapter 32, says Jacob wrestled with an Ish, a man, verses 29 and 31 muddy the waters by implying that he struggled with it was divine. Because Jacob says, I have seen Elohim face to face. Now, interestingly, Hosea 12 speaks of this encounter and clearly states this was indeed a heavenly being Jacob was wrestling with. Listen to this, Hosea 12, 3-6. Yehovah also has a grievance against Judah. He will punish Yaakov according to his ways, pay him back for his misdeeds. In the womb, he took his brother by the heel. In the strength of his manhood, he fought with God. Yes, he fought with an angel and won. He wept and pleaded with him. Then at Bethel he found him, and there he would later speak with us. Yehovah Elohei Zepha'ot. Yehovah is his name. Now, since Hosea actually adds some additional information about Jacob's wrestling match, let's stay camped there for a minute. Why this reference in Hosea of first saying Jacob's opponent was a man, and then saying it was Yehovah Elohei Zevaot? Simply put, it wasn't at all clear to Jacob, probably not to Hosea, who or what this being was. The spirit world was a mystery to Jacob. Although he, like everyone else in his time, strongly believed in it, accepted it as fact. And whoever it was that he was battling represented God. And Hosea even adds that it was actually an angel Jacob fought with. Let's talk about angels now for just a moment. There's been so much confusion that Christianity has added to just what an angel is. What the appearance of one portends, so on. The first thing to understand is that in its most foundational meaning, an angel is first and foremost a bearer of the divine oracle. An angel brings a divine message from God, or he carries out a divine command from God. Today we have the expression, don't kill the messenger, meaning that the person who's telling me something of importance isn't presenting me with his own words or even his own view or agenda. He's just been hired to bring to me the instruction from someone with more authority than himself. He's not responsible for the content of the message, other than for the duty to carefully and accurately deliver it. That's an angel. Yet the Bible will still use the word in a number of contexts, and I think often metaphorically or figuratively. For instance, in the Bible, prophets and priests were at times called angels of the Lord, or more aptly, messengers of the divine word. In fact, the prophets Haggai and Malachi are referred to in the scriptures as what is usually translated as angels of the Lord. Now, were Haggai and Malachi divine spiritual beings? No. But as men who were passing on to us, on to others, God's instructions to mankind, they certainly qualify as being messengers of God. Thus, another term for a prophet of God is a messenger, a malach of God. Even more, the term malach was at times used in a very general way to indicate any spiritual being. And although we won't get into it today, there was another and distinct class of spirit beings called Elohim that formed what the scriptures call the divine ruling council in heaven. Thus, Elohim by no means can always be translated to God, nor to malach, angels. Sometimes it means Elohim in the most technical sense. Sometimes it means that God is the chief Elohim. And other times it is used synonymously with malach as but a super general term for pretty much any spiritual being. Why? Because the spirit world and its population were such a mystery that To describe it and its inhabitants was beyond the early Hebrews' ability to know it or to do. And to my way of thinking, it remains a great mystery to this day, even though a few systematic theologies attempt to give us concrete answers that they've devised from their own speculations. We'll also see in Holy Scripture the distinctions between the bearer of the divine message, an angel of the Lord, and Yehovah himself occasionally get blurred. We see that in the burning bush episode and with Hagar, who was spoken to by an angel, but yet the text says she responded directly to God. And there are another of other biblical scenes like this as well. But that shouldn't surprise us, shouldn't seem strange, because we followers of Yeshua often find ourselves faced with a similar blurred distinction in trying to comprehend or explain to ourselves or to another person just who Yeshua is. He is a man, but he's also God. How can that be? We find that exact scenario here with Jacob, as the being he wrestled with is alternately called a man, an ish, or God, or Elohim, or malach, angel. And as we discuss or midrash with one another, let us not think that we somehow now have a greater insight into the spiritual world than the ancient Hebrews did, because we don't. Therefore, we need not become angry or rigid about our views, which by the very nature of the substance of the spirit world is something which these physical bodies of ours were not created with the proper sensors to detect. We can only know about the spirit world with what the Bible allows to be revealed to us. All the rest is speculation that at times becomes church doctrine. Well, now disabled by this divine messenger of some kind, Jacob still wouldn't quit wrestling with him, saying, I won't let you go till you bless me. Now, obviously, Jacob came to know that this was no ordinary man that he was grappling with. And over the years, I've heard many teachings on this event. I've also heard this event actually never happened. This is just a legendary fairy tale. I've also heard that this story was added to the Holy Scriptures many centuries later. More than any other explanation I've heard, that this is maybe just an allegorical campfire tale. But I'm quite convinced that it's none of the above. It's quite real. It did happen. What we have here is a scene that is at once literal and symbolic. Symbolic because all believers must go through a time when we wrestle with God over control of our lives. And if we are to truly apprehend that life which God has for us, a time must come when by our own choice, through our absolute surrender, we must leave our tattered history behind and start a new history with God as the true Lord of our lives. Jacob received a new name, meaning he was given a new identity. It's the same for believers. When we come to Christ in fullest sincerity, we receive a new identity, a new name, so to speak. Make no mistake, however, invariably, the scars and disabilities of our past will come with us. And we will have to deal with all these things the same way we see happening with Jacob. Even more, sometimes we will pay a dear price to leave our rebellious ways and go forward into a new life with Christ. This is why, when contemplating following Yeshua, we are told to count the cost, because it is far more costly than the Constantinian Church typically teaches. This was the case with Jacob, as he now inherited a permanent disability as the sign of his new identity. And in addition, he crossed over from a foreign place where he didn't belong into the promised land where God wanted him to be. He now has a different future, but his past still affected that future, often presenting large obstacles for him to overcome. But now God was with him to see him through it all. Well, after his encounter with the man, then with Esau, Jacob moved on again some amount of time, for which we aren't privy. Hebrew tradition is that it was about 18 months. He moves on to Shechem, same place his grandfather, Abraham, had come to when he first entered Canaan. Notice that once again we see history repeat itself in a pattern. But this was quite a changed place from the time when Abraham and Sarah camped on these lovely grounds. There was no city, not even a village at that time. It was just a place. It would not even have been called Shechem at the time Abraham was there. But now, in Jacob's time, a walled city had been built. There he purchased some land from the sons of Shechem's king, King Hamor. King Hamor was from one of the many tribes of Canaan, and his particular tribe was the Hivites. We also find out here that the city was named after one of King Hamor's sons, Shechem. Now, there was at first an invitation from the king for Jacob to join with them in peace and be permanent residents, something which Jacob was inclined to do, providing all the males of the city were circumcised. Well, they complied. But then, without Jacob's knowledge, in revenge for their sister Dinah being sexually abused by the king's son, Jacob's son set about killing every male in the city. This terrible action of mass murder forced Jacob to move on yet again. And while God certainly didn't cause this, the reality is that Jacob should have known he wasn't to settle down in Shechem and join their gene pool with that of a Gentile Canaanite of Shechem. In ways only Yehovah can bring about, he curtailed this terrible plan, and Jacob moved on. This leaves us with something that I've always been troubled with: the mystery of catastrophe that God regularly uses to move us along in redemption history. Each of us, as God worshipers, are subject to that reality. And you know, it helps us if we can see that while some bad things may happen to us, it can be for a reason or cause far greater than ourselves. This is where our faith must surface and override all.
For more teachings and information, visit us online today. Come and be a part of our fellowship here at The Seed. Enjoy worshiping and learning God's Word with us.